Welcome, everybody. We're excited about our guest this week. It's Lance Eaton, who's a Senior Associate Director of AI in Teaching and Learning at Northeastern University. He received his doctorate in higher education from UMass Boston, has been teaching in higher ed for 20 years. Stefan and I have both been fans of Lance's work for a long time and are excited to have him join us. So, Lance, thanks so much for joining us.
Super excited to be here. Similarly, fans of your work as well. So glad we're getting to spend some time nerding out.
Excellent. Looking forward to it. One of the reasons I'm particularly excited, Lance, of course, is that you will be the opening keynote speaker at the conference that my university is hosting entitled Reimagining the Liberal Arts in the Age of AI on July 22nd, 23rd. You are giving the keynote right after everybody registers the morning of the 22nd. And the title of your keynote, From Awakening to Building, Liberal Arts Next Moves for Teaching and Learning in the Age of AI. Do you think the liberal arts are ready for next moves? Are we ready to start to pivot?
I mean, no, but when are we ever ready for change, right? Like, if we're ready for change, we'd have changed. I think, and I come from this as somebody who, like, that's the area that I teach, history and literature and writing. It's an area I care deeply about. I'm a true nerd in terms of like I love to read. I love to like deeply be involved in the life of the mind. And we are navigating this tension about how we've been doing it. And the thing about AI is so much of the issues about AI are less about AI and more what AI revealed was already there, and it magnifies it. And so what I'm hoping, part of that conversation in July is building off of two previous pieces I've done with the Connecticut College and the folks that ran the liberal arts symposium, the AI and liberal arts symposium last October, where I got to actually in person meet both of you, and just building off this, like, it does give us one thing I've been thinking about a lot from very early on in all of this is like, it, for all the problems that people have about AI, like it gives us a moment to really have to radically reflect about what we're doing and what what should we put by the side and what do we hold on to. And I don't know, like I don't think we're gonna see another generational moment where we get to actually try to make all of this better. Because if you think about it, like prior to the pandemic, uh, we were largely just going along, right? And then the pandemic happens and that uproots everything. Then AI happens and that uproots everything. And I just think we're in this moment where it would be incredibly valuable for us to think about how do we get closer to the source of what demonstrable learning looks like. That is, the assessments. And this is why I'm a big fan of Stefan's work, and a lot of the stuff you share, Stefan, are of like diving into debates and like using debate as a form, as a live form of getting people to demonstrate their understanding and their learning and applying ideas. And so what I'm trying to do in this talk is to kind of build off what I did in that first talk, the sleep of liberal arts produces AI, and then the awakening of liberal arts, which I did in February again with the same folks, to really think about, okay, so now what might be some of the things that we do? What does this look like in action? And what's going to feel uncomfortable, but also what can be exciting in that?
It's a bit of a follow-up. I had a specific question here, but now I want to nuance it a little
Yep.
bit, kind of based on what you said, right? Like, in the abstract, right? For the for what you're kind of proposing, right? You're saying, well, it's going to expose kind of the long-standing tensions, right? It makes them visible, and what you were just kind of unpacking there a little bit is like, okay, when are we going to move on, right? And we COVID happened. People just they kind of thought, okay, well, there's COVID, so I got to modify things a little bit, especially if we're just gonna. A lot of us are gonna teach online for a while, or whatever. So people thought that was temporary, right? And then AI came along, right? And I think part of the reaction is like, well, we want to defend the status quo against AI, but the status quo is like the lecture, right? The paper,
Mm,
and I guess that's the teaching method, the lecture, and then the assessment method, right? The paper and
mm,
and testing, right? And there's just kind of those were always problematic, right? Like, it was what I hear you're saying. So I'm wondering if you could kind of just unpack that, notion that kind of AI brought it to the forefront. Maybe touching on like, the lecture's not, this magical way to teach or whatever you'd like to.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's there's like two trains of thoughts, and I'm gonna try to like map them out and connect them. The first is we like we always forget, we always seem to forget that the way that we did things, much of that was decided on convenience, right? The way we structure education, higher ed, and K through 12 right now, is a convenience model. Scientifically, there's nothing that says having people meet in 50 minutes, 75 minutes, or 3-hour chunks of time intermittently throughout the week is the proven way to do it for 15 weeks. No, we have a model that was given to us, or more or less given to us by Carnegie, who himself were like the tech bro. If we look at a lot of the ways our higher ed is structured, it's structured by who were the tech bros of the 18 and early 1900s deciding they wanted education to be one way or another. And we're right now trying to cling to that, which I think is hella ironic. So we don't have education that is actually grounded in how people learn. We have it structured in what is convenient and what can we get away with. So like that's one way that I'm thinking about this. And we've seen it, part of my background is I've been deeply involved in open education and open access and, textbooks in the ways that we claim to them. We keep forgetting that was the mass produced way to share knowledge. And so we're now in an age in which like that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to have a 50-page explanation of a process in which a 2-minute video does so much better. And so we're seeing those so those things are coming to the forefront for our students, for faculty. So that's kind of like one thing that I'm thinking about in this is like it is trying to call to the things that we've been doing out of habit versus the things that the things that are actually serving learning or just meeting learning might be the better term. So there's that part, and then there's the classroom part of I think lecture. When we talk about that general lecture, I do have concerns about it when it's the only method. I do think we need in all of our classrooms a diversity of approaches. I think some sharing of knowledge and information is something we all crave, and a lot of it has to do with like the way it's structured or thinking about who is the messaging for and how that's crafted, right? Like we're sitting here doing a podcast, which is in some ways it's a conversation among us, but it's still essentially a lecture to to the listeners. Same with all this other rich, many of us love video essays, right? So there's still value there. But I think what we're trying to have to negotiate is like, what is the value and meaning of the learning space? I was thinking a lot, I saw I was at NERComp in March. Beth McMurtry, who's a writer for the Chronicle, has done some really great work. She's writing good articles in the Chronicle. Let me just put it that way. If you recall the conversation last week about teaching and learning centers editorial piece there. But one of the things she highlights, and I've just been chewing about it ever since, is like, one of the things she wrote about as we came back from the pandemic was this like militant apathy by students, which also is an awesome term. Like let's pause for that. But militant apathy when students came back to the classroom. And in my mind, that made immediate sense because like what our students were coming back to was this like false sense of reality that they went online, they did all of their learning, and then they came back and they were told they had to come back. That like, oh no, we can't do we can't do hybrid or we can't do remote learning anymore. It has to be back in the classroom. And there was a sense of fraudulence there, a sense of fraudulence because like, oh, this virtual stuff doesn't count as much, so why didn't I get a discount? Why were you charging me the same, right? So we have that happen, and that creates a real sense of like, you know, practicing what you preach, or like being consistent in your messaging. And then AI comes up and also disrupts that, right? It also plays this role in like, oh, you've got to be prepared to be able to like write long reports. Like, you don't think there's going to be a machine out there that can do it for. So like there are these elements of that can feel fraudulent to our students, to a world at large, of saying like, oh no, this is the real thing, but maybe not. And I think in that gives us opportunity to really think in our classrooms, like, who am I doing this for? And that's going to be different. Like, I know I have some amazing colleagues who aren't lecturing. That's not their MO, but they're also still struggling with like, how do I approach it? How do I approach learning if AI is ubiquitous? And starting to like have to rethink, because it's not just the lecture part. It's the, what do I do when I have these tools that can, um, in different ways, not intellectually per se, but like outpace me in content and output and response, that I have to think differently in this space with these students. What is my new emerging role and identity? And I think that is the question I think a lot of us are grappling with.
I love that phrase, militant apathy.
Oh my
And
God, right?
not just for the students, but I see some of it
Oh,
from some of our colleagues too, right? And there's a lot there to unpack. The idea that the curtain was pulled back during COVID in so many areas of society. That you said you couldn't give us universal health care, but you did for a little while. You said there couldn't be a universal basic income, but you did for a little while. Why can't you continue that? So I think that also that's the context that we're all kind of living in. And I see that as a response coming from other faculty. I'm kind of curious as to now, when we think about how this moment is different, part of it is the way that we've considered other disruptions. So I've used this example. I'm sure we've all used the examples of, well, calculators came and that disrupted math. And that was a difference in the way that we were learning and technology that was being used. The internet, you go way back to the printing press. But if we're thinking about the kind of the way you've outlined, what we accept as the right standard for education was really just determined over the last 150 years or so. And there's no real scientific reason for us to have it other than appeals to tradition. I guess two parts that I want to ask you about. The first is, how about those other examples of disruption? Why didn't we see that as an opportunity, either of those, maybe especially the internet, to consider some of these other frailties of the system or problems that we had? I like that you're really optimistic that you view this as an opportunity. And I think that's what we should do. And you kind of gird ourselves to say, well, we have to view this as an opportunity. Why is it that AI presents that as an opportunity in a way that we haven't seen before?
I think it's the speed and the ubiquity, right? The internet, the internet, in terms of how it unpacked, like, that was 15 to 20 years. In other words, to a point in which you felt reasonably comfortable that everybody in the room could access it, right? Could it, it might be going to the lab, spending extra hours at the lab on the campus, but that, like, it took, for some places that long, and for that long for students for like the system itself to work out the, like, where are they learning these things and how do they come somewhat prepared to engage with them here. AI, I mean, 100 million users in less than 2 months, right? Like the fact that in like under 3 years, we're now at like over 3.5, but like, it was ubiquitous in all of the major tools that many of us use. It's all across Google, it's all across Microsoft, which basically means for many students, many faculty, it's here. So I think that was a big difference. Is there was more opportunities to push it away. I think there was also more opportunities to make incremental adjustments, right? To say, okay, then I'm just going to do this little thing. But one of the things I always think about, and I have been more recently using as a contrast, is like, Like, I remember starting to use online internet databases in undergrad and being, and faculty being like, that's not a real thing. My dissertation, part of the research as I was getting into stuff, like, I also found like these debates that are online journals, real journals. And it's just like nowadays, like, the margin of people that read physical journals, because many of them don't even print, is like completely flipped. So like there is this gradual thing versus like in under 2 years how ubiquitous it was, and how even now like the fact that institutions are starting to give access to models um in like basically under 4 years. I like You're only going to see that at the most elite institutions, the most resourced institutions, I should say. Those are
Yeah,
different.
different thing.
Good Venn diagram. But like the internet access, that was a slower progress than certainly AI has been.
One thing, and this kind of leads into the question. I think of things that maybe should have required us to shift, right? Like,
Yeah.
internet, right? Probably should have, but it didn't force it, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
it still give you, like, you still could use these assessments. It polluted the paper a little bit. 'Cause, there could be more plagiarism. I remember a student of mine who went to Harvard who's, he's like, well, hey, when we were in high school, we would just run the papers through like 9 different translators. And then, we would spit them out finally in English. So we couldn't get caught. So, it's been going around for a while, but it probably should have caused more changes, right?
Mm.
But I think AI like kind of forces the changes, right? Because it's like, okay, well now, it can write the paper, it can do the test. We have the ubiquity, like you described, like in the documents, but it's also now like we're meta glasses, we're gonna have it in contact lenses, it's in
Mm-hmm.
pens, right? There's really no way. And once it kind of problematized all the assessments, those other things created some problems for the assessments, but they didn't problematize it in the way that AI does. It kind of forces the shift. But kind of is my follow-up question, right? So we're dealing with, I think we all agree, these huge potential changes. The one of the things, you promised, right, for the next move was a small set of design shifts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Reliably increase learning and value, which makes sense because we got to move people, right? If we come in and say we're gonna do everything different, then
Mm.
you kind of get a little pushback. But what are some of those small design shifts? And then if you could a little bit, maybe explain reliability, but also like, why do you think like they're reliable?
Yeah. I mean, the one that I've been leaning into that I feel it's the most traction to then start exploring, because this becomes the other the other challenge within this is that how to figure this out. I think the first few years have generally provided some insight, some guidance about how to start to approach this, but really digging in as we get into assessment, as we get into what to teach, like what to teach about AI, what to teach about the discipline, becomes very disciplinary based. But the small design I have been like playing with and encouraging folks around, excuse me, is just actually having students start research with AI. And it's an uncomfortable thing, right? It's an uncomfortable thing for faculty because of a lot, especially if they haven't used AI. It's an uncomfortable thing to think about them starting to do research literature searches and the like. But the way I try to help them understand it is just this contrast of, there was a time, as I said previously, like doing research, you had to physically go to the library. And now nobody goes to the library, right? Like I did an entire dissertation. I never stepped foot in the library. I had thousands of sources, but didn't step into the library. And so it's recognizing part of the reason we don't go to the library. It's not just because the card catalogs don't exist anymore, but it's also, there's an efficiency there. There's a clarity there compared to the card catalog. In trying to help faculty understand we're in that same relational space between exploring databases, which the three of us, I'm going to assume, we're fairly comfortable, whether we like it or not, we're fairly comfortable making our way through, jumping through all of that. But if you're like you're early in your career, you're earlier as a student, starting with a AI feels incredibly more efficient and sense making, so long as you're using it well and so long as you're recognizing it as a start. And so this is the for me, this is the through line that I think is going to be hardest for faculty to navigate. Not that as a move, but the reason I think this move is so important is we actually have to start where students are. In most of our teaching practice, and I say this entirely guilty, is I starting courses where I am and expecting students to get to me, and recognizing more and more where they are going to start. They're going to start with AI. We can either help them understand how to do that much better and get the results that they can start on that path to research and exploring topics, or we can keep fighting them. We can say, no, go to the databases, while they're still going to go to the chat log. Like they're still not all, but many are still going to go to the thing that has less friction, because databases are full of useless friction or confusing friction. And so I think, to me, like when we talk about small design shifts, it's that mindset of, if I know there's a task they're likely to start with here, how do I help them start there the best way possible in a way that leads them to the thing that I want them to do? The reliability piece, I think, is going to be a thing where on that. And I mean, the reliability is, do they come up with solid research that's related to the subject matter? But I think in general, it's going to be contextually dependent. And this is what's this is what's hardest, is this is going to, for now, maybe for a long while, require more of us, require more from us to help uh, figure out what is and isn't working, and to be sharing that regularly, and to be learning from that, because there is, I don't know if you guys have had this experience, but I am equally curious when I hear a colleague has done something with AI, a colleague, educator, whoever I'm working with, has done something with AI and it's gone really well, and it's gone really bad. Like, I need to know the details, or I want to know the details down to, oh, you recommended prompts. What prompts did you recommend? Oh, you feel you got really good responses from them. Like, I want to, what does that mean? Because I think there's a lot going on underneath that surface that I think we're just starting to scratch the surface. That, like, we're just starting to realize the layers of this.
I think that the way you're outlining it, I find really compelling. And I think that for many of us have been studying this for a while, we kind of get that, and it's an easy jump. But I have a number of colleagues that are pushing back on the work I'm doing at the center, and my particular position, to say, why do you just claim that this is inevitable, and maybe we have some agency to stop it? So maybe instead of meeting students where they are, we should recognize they're not in the right spot and they shouldn't be using these tools, and we need to reintroduce friction. So yes, it's easier for them. That doesn't mean it's better for them. And I think this is obviously a very complex position that they're trying to present, but I'm wondering how you respond to those colleagues that are saying, no, we shouldn't accept this. We have to resist. There's a way we can stop it. Um, what do you say to them?
I mean, I've done. It's also layered. It's onions all the way down. Um, I think that, like, there's a couple pieces in that that I often try to understand or play around with. Like, on a political level, yes, they can absolutely do things, and they can push back. I would encourage that. Many of the things I would agree with, like, I get frustrated sometimes when I get asked questions and I'm finding myself saying things that are true, but also sound like I'm defending tech bros, because like that's not a place I want to be. Like I have a lot of concerns about what they're doing. So I mean, some of it is just empathizing. Like there's problems here. I think the inevitability part for me is recognizing like they may not be inevitable, these tools, and that may be true. But how long do we keep having that conversation at at the cost of students? Because we're in year 4, right? Students are going to be graduating. Students have already at 2-year schools and but people are graduating this year, 4 years, with having at many institutions having no clear institutional guidance, no curriculum change, and a very scattershot engagement about what AI means within their work. And that also feels like we are being negligent about their education, because even if the argument is you shouldn't use it at all, we're trying if that's grounded in we want our students to be critical thinkers, that also means they have to actually critically engage with these tools. Like this idea of you don't talk about it, it's not Fight Club. You don't talk about it. You don't, all you learn in position it as is in this negative sense. That feels problematic, because there's also they're still going to have to encounter it, and they go on their first job and they're being told to use it, and they yes, they can absolutely resist, and they should if they feel uncomfortable with it. And also, have we prepared them to be working in places where this is the norm? And it's great to have values. It's also great to have dinner. That we're where I was speaking to a colleague earlier today. The challenge I have about that resistance is around no engagement with AI is, if you look at the proposition we're putting in front of students, it is utterly insane. We are saying to students, we want you to potentially spend, if not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars on this thing called education. We have no guarantee that the outcome is going to result in a degree. We have no guarantee the outcome is going to result in a job, or a job that can actually help you pay your bills or make that ladder upward. While you're in here, we're going to give you very limited agency in what your course of education is. We're going to give you, you have these lanes with not a lot there. We're going to make you take courses of which, when you go to sign up for them, all you have is a 300-word description of what that course is and what that course is going to be like. Even though if it's a composition class, there's 100 being offered, all of which are very different courses. We're going to have you do that semester after semester. And we're going to expect you don't use this technology that's everywhere and that increasingly employers are talking about. And we want you to do it all for the love of the mind. Again, I'm not saying this as somebody who doesn't deeply believe in the life of the mind. It's where I sit. But that just feels insane to ask that of somebody that's 18 years old, not anybody really, but even our youth. So to me, there is this I understand that resistance, but I think I keep coming back to we need to be critically engaged with it. We need to help students recognize, there are important places for us to have friction, but you don't help people develop judgment and self-efficacy through abstinence. Abstinence generally doesn't work as a plan, as a process. And I say that because one of the areas in my 20s and 30s that I was very much researching was abstinence only education, and the problems around that as a policy in terms of what it doesn't prepare people to be capable conversations even being capable of in that space.
Yeah, I almost think like an acts of resistance. It's really an extreme act of privilege, right? It's a privilege of age, right? People are more
Mm-hmm.
in their careers and they can write it out. In many instances, it's a privilege of tenure, right? It
Mm.
kind of compounds that, right? It's kind of a privilege of kind of groupthink to a degree. Well, if everyone all agrees all around me, all my friends or none of the kids are going to use AI, right? Then they don't have any alternative, right? And it's at the
Mm.
expense. It's at the expense of the younger generation. Like when you were talking about it, I always kind of think you can roughly college tuition, maybe roughly the price of your first home.
Mm.
Right? Like, like you say, like, 200 to $400,000. That basically get you a house, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and most markets. And, to extend your analogy, what if you said like, all right, I'm going to sell you this house.
You may or may not have it.
Well, what's in it? Oh, I don't know. Like, what's the resale value? Oh, uncertain. You're probably at least going to get 10 or 20 grand for it. What kind of what kind of life will this give me? Where is it located? We'll let you know. We'll let you know. But if you have this house, there's at least a good chance you'll be able to live in it, right?
Yeah.
You'll be able to get some value from it. I mean, we're not going to guarantee you the roof doesn't leak, or maybe you need to make some improvements, like take AI classes after you graduate from our $400,000
Right.
institution so that you can get a job.
From our
Right?
master's
We don't
programs.
offer any of these things, but if you give us the 400 grand, there's a chance that like it'll kind of work out. Like, and I just the more I kind of think about like the cost, and I'm on
Mm.
my second kid go
Mm.
through education, both in high tuition universities, it just really kind of hits me like,
Mm.
okay, what if if you just spent all that money and bought my house, would they be better?
Mm-hmm.
I and that's why I get like some of the frustration like I get with the AI. It's like we're not preparing them, and in many instances, it's probably has more of an economic impact than what you're teaching them. Like, right? Like it probably will have more of a direct kind of impact, on their livelihood. And it's only because we have this privilege, and compound that, like I was going to say, like, if you work in a company, you can't just resist AI. I mean, you can, but you're not going to have a job. You can't go in the military and resist AI. They'll just kick you out, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's an extreme position of privilege, resist AI. But that's my rant. I should ask a question. Since we went a little out of order, I'll ask Anand's question. I guess we both had a chance to rant there, but for a faculty member who's listening, who teaches, say a 4-4 loaded, like a regional comprehensive, maybe, community college, that can be as high as 5-5. Like,
Yep.
what's this single kind of highest leverage move, right, that they could make kind of going into the fall that in any way you want to define leverage,
Yeah.
think through it.
I mean, I keep it's I'm gonna give 3 because these are the ones I feel like almost day 1 I've been talking about, um, that I think are the way through it. The first is you've got to play with it, and you've got to play with it until you like if you are concerned about it, you have issue, particularly if you have a negative disposition, which is valid, but you've got to play with it until you get a moment of an aha, being like, wow, that did something really cool. And the expectation is not you then keep doing that, but to understand the way that this tool can feel unlocking and powerful, just like so many of our other tools. Like just that moment to get to that wow moment, to help hold that in your head as you're thinking about what it means for your students with these tools and what it means for possibly what's next. The second one is communities of practice. Find some people to play and share. This is a tool that intersects so much with thinking, and the more we can see how other people are using it, the more we can understand and find those ways to improve practice or come up with ideas about what could work for my class. And then the third is, and I think this is the one that continues to be um, challenging, but it's incredibly useful, is you need to not just have an AI policy in your syllabus, but you need to make it an active conversation throughout the course and give room to, I would encourage as you approach every assignment, articulating ways they can use it, giving them some prompts, giving some space to be like, hey, did people use this? Did this work? What did you like? Creating that to understand where students are and start to build better hypotheses about where they're going to be. Because right now, that the absence of that means, again, it's like people are taking guesses and they're taking semesters long to figure it out rather than like assignment by assignment, activity by activity, being able to refine and learn what works and what doesn't. And to know it's just not going to, I was going to, like, and none of this is going to be perfect. This is going to continue to be messy. And that's the work that we do. Like that, like, even before AI, it was always messy.
Yeah. And this just makes it messier. And that's what I love about your answer is that we have to have those conversations. And that's also it's going to lead to great reward. I mean, the students are more likely to buy in. They're more likely to take it seriously, view you with credibility. You have a better sense as an instructor of where they are and what their needs are as they communicate that to you. And all of this is changing so rapidly. Even if we could give them a playbook, do it this way, it's going to be outdated sometimes before the end of the semester. So this is I think that's a much better way to equip yourself with how do I manage this day by day? Let's go through this together. I mean, the hard part for a lot of faculty is that it results in, it at least looks like you're giving up authority or expertise. And that's difficult for a lot. That's kind of what we've built up as our career. That's why you go for this advanced degree. That's why you're a faculty member. You have expertise, and it's tough to admit when you don't have it.
And that's the damning part, because I think so much about that like that's performative expertise, right? Because we know, like, the real expert is the person who knows what they know and knows what they don't know. And I think I think one thing that happens in our learning spaces is this like compound effect. Compound effect meets like the availability heuristic, where semester after semester we refine things and we still get students asking questions. And so we build perceptions of like, I'm continuing to improve, but my students aren't. And so it's the students that are the problem, right? Not recognizing always that like, um, we're no longer a student, and so we really don't always see through their eyes. We don't always have that beginner's mind, or that beginner, or patience with that beginners, because like I've taught this 1,000 times, so obviously it's readily available in my head. Why isn't it in yours? And that's also like, again, there's psychological things that we're all navigating as we step into these spaces too.
Yeah. One thing you mentioned also in that answer is the idea of having a community of practice, and faculty cohorts obviously are a great mechanism for it. I want to use this as a
Yes.
segue to talk a little bit about a recent project you've been working on, the AI faculty cohort programs collection. And I remember seeing you put out a call for people to contribute. And when I was looking at this online, you have over 100 institutions, I think, that
Yes.
have contributed. I'd love to hear a little more about this, and also to hear if there are any patterns that surprised you when you were looking at the submissions.
Yeah, so we at Northeastern on the Cattler team, we've been running faculty fellow programs around AI for 2 years now, and they've been really rich and interesting to see. And so we decided, like, what would happen if we also engaged other people that were running fellows programs to like learn and exchange. And so we decided we'd start with a practice that I've done before, which is like, I created a Google sheet, I created a Google form, and I went out to the world and said, hey, we'd love to hear what people are doing. And as we were starting to think about that, we're like, not just having that, right? Because I think that is a great resource on its own. You can go there and you can see lots of different things and see some of the different types of programs and the ways that people are supporting them. But we also recognize people are gonna just want to they want to report just the facts, but they're hungry for the conversation. And so we're like, why don't we also do a convening? And so the idea is, if you submit your institutional faculty cohort program, the details there, you're invited to this event on May 27th, where the goal is for us to do a little bit deep dive into like what's working, what isn't, how can we help one another, what can we learn from one another. And that's going to, the bigger pictures, we're hoping to put that, like, have the conveners, basically the people that are facilitating this program, like, have us have this rich conversation that sets us up and kind of leads a pathway to doing a 2-day summit in early August. I'll follow up on the dates. But in early August, where we would invite not just the facilitators, but also the faculty that are in these cohort programs. Because one of the things that I think, again, to my point of communities of practice, is like getting to learn what other people are doing and getting to see how other people are experiencing their cohort programs. They're all going to be different, but there's such a rich opportunity. There clearly, like, these are the 100 institutions that have submitted theirs, but we know there's hundreds of others that have started to do these types of things. Like, what can we gain by that? How might we be able to move like the needle forward in supporting faculty and having faculty learn from one another about like what is and isn't working, depending on what their institutional missions are and depending on what their strategies are around like where AI fits in the institution. Um, I think for me and for the Cattler team, we started as a really rich opportunity to be in conversation with others and to also learn a lot about learn and share like what we're finding in this.
I just wanted to not really pull it back, but maybe to emphasize, right, or talk about, the liberal arts, right? That's kind of my background, right? And the sciences, like, you do write that liberal arts, remain indispensable, right? But only if we translate our values into learning designs, right, that hold up under new conditions. I think part of this is, a reference to kind of what we talked about before. But I'm wondering if you could talk about, what you kind of, how would you define the liberal arts? And, what of that kind of concept, that particular definition, you think is especially important in, this era? And then maybe how might you translate that into practice with an example?
All right. So definition of liberal arts, how it's applicable to the world today and
Like,
tangible in the
yeah, just
classroom.
like an example. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I mean, when I think about liberal arts, I've always thought of it and experienced as like the set of thinking tools that empowers you to move through the world and really be better at transference. It's a very personal definition, not necessarily a textbook one, as one might say. But what I keep thinking about, or thing I've centered on, particularly in the last 5 years, is um, I genuinely believe, like when we think about students, we think about them often as they come to college to gain those skills, the critical thinking, the problem solving, like all of these things. Like there's ways we vision them as that blank slate. And I'm increasingly fundamentally believing like students have nearly all of the skills that we're wanting them to have. The problem is the transference. And the example, like, I think for me, particularly previous to Northeastern, I was at College Unbound, which focused on adult learners. And one of the things we do some competency-based opportunities there. One of the things we always wanted students to do as they would create a portfolio around these different competencies. And the thing that like we tried to emphasize, and because we just recognize this, is like these were adult learners, but I think trues of younger traditional students, that they already are practicing many of the things just in domains that aren't valid by higher ed, aren't valid by the liberal arts, right? So my typical example is like if you were a single parent during the pandemic, you were practicing the hell out of, or even if you weren't a single parent, but like I was like the demographic, some of the that was a larger population of our students, but like you are practicing the hell out of problem solving, right? Like you have a master's degree in problem solving because your kids survived or whatever,
Yeah.
So that's, to me, that's kind of why, like with that in mind, with the idea that, I think about my own life, I think about many students I've interacted with and people like they have these things. It's about how do they further develop them, or how do they work to transfer them. And I think that's where, the liberal arts comes in so powerfully, because it gives us lots of different domains, like lots of different domains to play, to try out, to explore. This is what problem solving looks here and looks there, and trying to abstract that as a process. And that's, incredibly why it feels so valuable and relevant as we go into an age of AI, where it feels increasingly needing that flexibility, needing the ability to transition contexts, whether that's professional, whether that's technological, whether that is just having to find out, like, oh, this new piece of work, I have to work very differently, and I say that because the other conversation I'm hoping to us have is around agentic AI, and like, what does that mean for how we work? And like, it's that transference, that ability to take how you understand, you work, and you think, and move it into another context. In the classroom, one of my favorite activities to draw this out is that kind of like I started doing, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago, and it is always one of my funnest activities. Is again, I teach a lot of literature and history, places where like interpretation is important. And time and again, I go to my students and I say, okay, you guys, like, how to do a deep read of a text. Textual analysis. You don't call it that, but you know it. And I can get them to show that in like a really simple exercise that entails 2 words. I put up on the board, or I put up on the screen, I say, I just got this text from a friend. Here's what it says. All it says is, it's fine, period. Tell me, is it fine or not, and why? I've had I've had to cut that conversation off at 20, 25 minutes, right? Because what are they doing? They're analyzing. And so I will use that. And this is what I mean, again, of meeting the students where they are, using that as the like starting to bring them into the discipline. Like, that to me is that, like, those types of cornerstone, recognizing, helping them see what's already there, and then bringing it towards the thing that is part of the course.
I think that the examples that you're providing are a great example, going back to the cohort programs collection, of the variety of different institutions and learning environments that really is. There's a lot to explore there, to think about what does that really mean when we define an education, when we define learning outcomes and objectives. So I hope that we can get back together and talk about this after you have everybody together in August, because I would love to hear some commonalities you find. I was hoping, though, if we could shift gears a little bit and talk about AI agents, because there's something here that we were talking earlier about, kind of the gap between people that are resistant to AI and then those that are kind of accepting and trying to do something with AI. The other gap that I'm really concerned about is the gap between those who are really using a chatbot versus agentic AI. And a lot of this you see not just in higher education, but throughout society, where there's a recognition that the AI models are advancing so rapidly. For the vast majority of users, they wouldn't even recognize it, because their standard chat is pretty much the same. You get to a point where there's nothing that 4.7 is going to do of Opus that's very different than 4.6. But when you start moving to agentic work, there's a whole explosion in terms of opportunities and applications. I'm trying to grapple with this. I'm running a workshop for local business people on agentic workflows in a couple of weeks, and I'm thinking about how could I bring that back into the classroom. How do you approach this? And really, whatever direction you want to take it, I'm thinking about that gap, because I'm really worried about, we're going to get everybody to the use of AI that was probably most prevalent a year ago, and they're going to miss out on all this other discussion. And I'm not sure how to force that, or how to lead them there. What do we do about that gap?
I don't know. I might ask an agent to figure out. No. So, that distinction, I'll add one more. There's, when the paid versions first came out, one of the comparisons that I made between like the free version versus the paid version is like, and again, this is a dated reference, but I feel like I'm with people that will understand, is like, the free version is like being on the internet in the 2000s, but then when I ask you what you mean by that, you say, oh yeah, I'm on AOL, right? Like that's the difference, being on AOL versus being on the internet. And that's the same difference right now between like using AI chatbots and starting to use agentic stuff. I worry about it because I worry about a few things. The first is just it's another layer of complexity and understanding, and a new set of language, a new set of like how you create those workflows and how you understand them. So like there's all of that to configure. There's all of the security stuff to configure. And this is where friction is really concerning, because the tendency, and I know I've been guilty of this, is to just be always accept, right? Like if I'm using Claude Cowork or Claude Cobot or Claude Code, like I catch myself just sometimes being like, always allow, like you can have free reign. And it's just like, that's not a good idea. But the the ability for us to feel okay with that, like they make it easy, like and they make it easy in some ways because they only allow it, like they only give you two choices, like it's a black or white, and I think there could be more gradation there. um, so I think that's really hard. And then the thing that I keep grappling with generative AI, I thought there was some really fairly early on, because I had started teaching a course like in January 2023 around AI in education, like I could start to find what are some possibilities about uh, some positive uses, some positive ways that like I know there's going to be concerns and problems, but like it's also going to be like I can see some things this offers, whether it's simulations, debates, reflection, like things that this could be really helpful in the learning space. I'm still trying to figure out what are those use cases with agentic AI, because again, it's gonna be, you know, whether it was real or performative, the Einstein AI was a moment to make everybody like, you know, check their drawers. Like it was a moment where clearly this is what agentic AI can do. Like you can sign up $40 a month and some bot's gonna go do all of your classes. Right? So like we know there's the concerning problematic pieces, but what do we offer? What do we say? Can we find anything that's redeemable, not just in the productivity space, right? Like, yes, I've been using agentic AI for some really cool, nerdy productivity things. But what about the learning space? And that's where I'm still grappling with, and I'm still trying to, in conversation with folks like yourself, figure out like what's there that we can feel like if we put this in front of faculty and students, it's like, oh, there's some power learning that's happening.
I wrote down a few notes here, I can prove it, about ways that, in education, and, teachers, professors could use agentic AI, but then you made that productivity space.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yep.
kind of had to delete. I said, wait, I think, the one I came up with is, kind of comes from a little bit of feedback, is like, it could be the initial feedback, on a student, as soon as that paper hits an email or other submission system on campus or wherever you use, right? It would provide initial feedback to the student, right? And
Mm.
you could even say, "Hey, this is not from your professor. This is just feedback. You might want to consider it. You could take it, right? They could revise it, and submit it, submit it, right? Like, so I don't know. I thought of that because when we were working, I just had it out here because I was showing somebody working on our pluralism book. I'll promote, somebody, and this was early on, said, "Oh, well, once you think your chapter is like totally done, just send it, put it back in the AI and ask it if it has any additional like major references that you're missing, right, in the thing, right?" That could, that worked great. Like I got 3 or 4 more things that turned out to be pretty useful. But that kind of stuff could be done automatically, almost like as and this is more in the research space than in the teaching space. But as you're working on something, the AI is kind of just sitting there, like,
Mm-hmm.
rather than waiting, "Oh, I'm going to send this to a friend, like once I finish this thing," it's kind of working on it. And those kind of things do require some prompting, but that's a couple examples. I think and I don't know that we need like all the examples, like faculty are going to want some, but to me, it's about like workflows. We know when you're doing this in an instructional setting, students are seeing like how it works. they're going to try it, even if some, minimal way, right? So then they get into a workforce, so, they become an entrepreneur. I'm a big fan of probably we'll all be entrepreneurs, or at least my kids will. Then they'll have to. Now that they want to be
If they want
entrepreneurs,
that house.
they might have to be entrepreneurs. Then you kind of learn the workflows, like Anand was referencing, talking to the business about. A lot of this is the workflows, and some of it's just kind of intuitive. I was explaining to somebody the other day, oh, well, this thing wasn't working, right? So then, I just tried it this way. Right. And then, but, that was just kind of me thinking through, and you got to have enough knowledge. But, that's one thing I thought of. I don't know. I know you want some ideas from us, so I tried pretty hard.
Appreciate it.
I've been thinking a lot about this, Lance, and I have some of the same concerns. It's really hard to make the case, especially the colleagues that are already skeptical or worried about the loss of friction, that we should introduce agentic AI. The best immediate case is, yeah, but students are going to have to learn how to use this because when they're going out in the job market, they need to be able to do it. So then maybe the case is wait and teach it to them at the end, so that they can. It's the ad at the addition that you
Make
include
sure
at
they
the
get
end.
in all 4 years before,
Yeah, wait 4 years and we'll tell you. But I think there are a couple of other aspects of this that are important to me, I think. One of them is I'm incorporating it in the fall within a version of a small group communication class. So what I've always been intrigued by, and I remember talking about a year ago with some colleagues that have now come around and said, yeah, now I see where you're going with this. The idea that you need to be able to manage the agents and learn how to engage with them as coworkers, collaborators. And what I want to experiment with is the idea of a small group of students working with some agents as part of the group, as other participants in the group, so that it includes the friction of the humans having to make decisions and having to guide them and give feedback, and then the bot gives them feedback. You could do that with a little bit of a chatbot, but the agentic workflow is going to work better. That's one aspect of it that I think is important. But I think I think what stands out to me about it is that it leads to the second, is that we have to get people to understand that we need to view this as malleable. We need to be able to change what those agentic tools do, because it is too easy to simply say it can do all of this work better than I can do right now, so I'll just let it do it. But if we can view it as kind of the jetpack that allows me to do better work because I can decide what it's going to do, I incorporate my judgment. It's what Stefan was saying with workflows. We have to, and the only way we can get to that stage where we can start to design the workflows is first understand how it works. Now, the hard part is I'm afraid that it really undermines that motivation. If a student or a coworker or a staff member can see, yeah, but I can just automate it and it's done. Why would they worry about a workflow? But I'm thinking, how do we get us to a mindset where it's not meeting typical standards or past practices, but what are those new practices going to be? And as I think we've talked about, I think even when we were meeting in the fall, I've been concerned about motivation. How do we define what that motivation is? And it's not just the always more or always more productive. It's really more about something that's better. And that's the sticking point for me.
It might not be the product's better. I mean, obviously you want a good product, but you kind of primarily, and maybe it works well in, interpersonal, right? Like or intergroup, it was group or personal, like you're grading the workflow, right? And, with kind of the understanding that probably, over time, if you have a good workflow, then you're going to get a good product. But yeah, it is tricky. I was thinking of that too, as everybody was talking. It's like, well, they're just going to see all these agents doing all the work, and they're going to be like, well, I heard that, companies are replacing people with AIs. I can see now how they can do this because, it's not just one AI. You have 1,000 AIs. We heard on the Moonshots podcast, Dave Blunden said he finally got 1,000 AIs to work together. I was like, wow. It's like, okay, yeah, I can't outcompete 1,000 AIs working together. If you just take each one, each has a weakness, and I can compensate. But and I think that to even just go back to some of the stuff at the beginning, like how you're positioning the value of higher ed, like what students are learning, and I think in some ways all this stuff has to become immediately a lot more practical.
Practical, and I think to Anand, your point, like the motivation is the practical and more meaningful, and those they're similar and different, but I think that's where I certainly like Northeastern, but other places doing things like co-ops, doing things like internships, like things, those types of things. It's where I lean into with open pedagogy, where The idea is that like the output has a life beyond just serving the purpose of the grade, right? So that could be digital service learning projects or service learning projects. It could be building out things that other students are going to have to use or the like. And so really trying to think about this new idea of like, and again, this is where I think this is where I'm slightly excited is the like, oh, like it isn't the assessment isn't there just to prove a hoop was hopped through. The assessment was there to like to reach new ground. And there's something interesting there. I still worry about, to the point with agentic AI, but at least with generative AI, I feel like there's good grounding there right now.
I like that. Try to get everybody to appreciate that we want to reach new ground. And that's hard for faculty too, as well as for students to appreciate that there is new ground to be found. I wanted to ask your thoughts about if you really imagine this transition occurring, and maybe we start with a liberal arts college. If, let's say, a liberal arts college has made this transition well, what do you think, let's say 3 to 5 years from now, what would be concretely different about the student experience 3 to 5 years from now at a school that has done this, that has managed this transition?
Oh, gosh. Well, one, I think they'd still be in the transition. I think both because the tools are changing and they are indicative of like a refinement process. Like, and I think that's one of my colleagues, like whenever we start to talk about assessment and like we realize, oh, if you had them do this, oh yeah, the AI could still do it. And so, kind of like it's elephants all the way down, it's AI all the way down. And so I think one part of this is as we have these tools is like it's almost there's a cyclical process of revisiting um, what we're doing, and I understand that is what like accreditation is and stuff, but this feels a little bit more honed in specifically around the AI developments. I think at a liberal arts college, there's going to be, or I guess I could see doing it well would entail some distinctions between, and we still see this a little bit, but like between courses that are for the major and courses that are building out one's deeper understanding. I think we're leaning into that more and helping students understand like there's going to be practices that are more deliberate, as so much practice is supposed to be deliberate, and some of that's more important in one's major than it might be in a course that's outside of that. So I think better articulating, better navigating that difference. I think another is going to be like if we're thinking 3 to 5 years out, um, in liberal arts, some in the liberal arts are going to hate this, but they are going to be more tightly attuned to industry and disciplines, because the challenge we're all facing right now, and we need to be in like a regular feedback loop in, is AI forces us to ask the question, what do we still need to teach and what do we need to let go of? Just like the calculator did, just like the internet did. The problem is we're not going to know the impact of like what we drop out and what we hold on to until people are in the field. And so that is 3 to 5 years from now. So to be really trying to understand the impact of like how these changes are happening to make the better recalculations. Like there's all of this is a massive significant recalibration, when historically it had been a little bit more deliberate over a period of time. I think we're going to have to be more actively calibrating every 2 or 3 years with what we're seeing is happening to our graduates in the world, where they feel prepared and where they don't, that we can tie to what they're learning in their programs.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we mostly talked about kind of methods, so to speak. teaching methods, assessment methods. And, we could do this in another podcast about content, right? Which I think is, what you're talking about there a little bit, are we still teaching coding, right? Or, maybe
Hmm.
maybe coding becomes the composition class, right? That all the freshmen are taking, but very few people are learning more than that and getting a CS degree, right? I mean, I could see it
Mm.
happening, right? So, but I think it's hard because those changes, like you say, adding a course can take take a year,
Oh,
right?
yep.
Long time, let alone say, "Oh, well, we gotta really kind of completely restructure, like, what we offer in, computer science." I mean, departments go away, right? We've seen that with Syracuse and, some other places, but that kind of through attrition, right? So,
Mm.
I think the hardest thing is it just doesn't change that fast. Like, industry is changing very quickly, at least they're trying, and it's hard for them, right? But they're trying to change really quickly. Whereas
Mm.
education, in most places, I don't see it, trying to change very quickly, right? It changes, and I think people, like you say, Northeastern, I always thought that was cool, the kind of internship type thing, right? So, uh, maybe things, but yeah, I mean, we could there's so many things we could probably talk about for hours.
It yeah.
It's
Yeah, I think part of the maybe the way we framed I even framed the question that a school that has successfully transitioned probably suggests that they've already figured out a way to transition and change faster than many
Yeah,
others. And that probably answers part of the earlier question about what do we do with agentic AI? We have to introduce it.
Mm. Well, yeah, that to me continues to be like how and why I'm in the space. I was doing a workshop last week and a half ago, whatever, at North Shore Community College. It's where I first started teaching. It's where I first started instructional design. It's a place I absolutely love, and I also graduated from there. One of my first, like as an icebreaker, I had a slide, and I was just like, in April 2010, I presented here, and I was like, I did during their professional development day. I did a workshop on a technology that was ruining education, and faculty were severely worried about. What was that? And they gave a few minutes to figure it out, and I still had the slides, and so I put the slide up there. It was Wikipedia,
Yeah.
right? Like, and in that, like, there was this moment for me to be like, what I was doing then is the same that I like has landed me here, which is like, I don't necessarily like these technologies. Like, I'm finding interesting things, but it doesn't mean I feel good about them on lots of different levels. But they're here, and I don't think we do our students justice by not trying to wrap our heads around them and think about where they fit or how we can recognize their presence, right? And if we look at Wikipedia as an example, like 15 years later, 16 years later, it's a different story. People are like, yeah, go there to start your research, or oh, let's practice public writing. Oh, let's look at debate by going into the history of these posts. So like, it just feel like it just I don't think we can not be engaged in the world that our students are. And that means grappling with things we may not like.
Lance, this has been a great conversation. Really appreciate you joining us. And I cannot wait to welcome you to campus this summer
Yeah.
and looking forward to the keynote and more conversations. And I think we want to definitely follow up after you've had that group of the faculty cohorts come to Northeastern. I think there's so much
Yeah.
there, I think, that others can really benefit from. For those that are watching that haven't followed your work, where can they find you? How can they find out more about you?
I mean, the easiest place is to put in Lance Eaton in Substack, and I'm pretty sure you'll find mine, which is AI+Edu equals simplified. And it's really not. That's kind of the like, being a little ironic there, but that's where I pretty much post all of my AI related content. And from there, you can always find my other various hubs on the internet.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Thanks so
Thank you.
much, Lance. This is
Thank
really,
you.
really enjoyed it.
Same. Thank you so much.